This podcast contains discussions of sexual exploitation, abuse, including the abuse of children and vulnerable populations, as well as institutional failures that may be addressing or triggering for some listeners. Please take care of yourself while listening and feel free to skip or step away if needed. The episode addresses survivors' experiences and sensitive topics surrounding the Epstein case, including issues of accountability and healing. If you or someone you know has experienced sexual assault or abuse, support is available through the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673 or RAINN, RAINN.org. Welcome to the Voices of Pueblo Podcast, brought to you by the Pueblo Star Journal in Pueblo, Colorado. I'm Molly Cotner, and today we're diving into the stories, inspirations, and innovations shaping our city's vibrant arts scene and stories. Let's get started. So today I am in the studio with Chantal Woodyard and Gregory Howell, and we're talking about the Epstein case, which is one of the most notorious examples of systemic sexual exploitation and abuse in recent history. And we're talking about how those files still haven't been released fully. So this isn't just a story about a powerful man. It's about who gets protected, whose voices are buried, and how survivors live with the consequences long after the headlines fade. We are going to be talking with Chantal, who is a survivor of sexual assault, about what it means to live in the shadow of sealed files, myths, and partial truths, and how that silence ripples through all survivors, not just those connected to Epstein. Before we begin, a quick note: remember that this is about sexual assaults and exploitation, so please make sure that you're taking care of yourself while listening.
So we're going to switch just a brief moment here just to give our listeners a little bit of context, setting the stage. What are the Epstein files? To understand what's at stake, we need to separate fact from rumor. In 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested on federal sex trafficking charges. He died weeks later in a Manhattan jail cell. Since then, the public has demanded the release of what's been called the Epstein files. In 2025, the Justice Department released some of those materials: flight logs, property records, and evidence lists. But large parts remain sealed: grand jury transcripts, survivor testimony, and internal investigative files. Officials say they're protecting privacy. Critics say they're protecting power. What we do know is that Epstein's network and the institutions that enabled it stretched across politics, media, and finance. What we don't know is how deep the protection ran and who looked away.
So today's guest is someone that many of our readers will recognize. Chantal is a board member here at the Pueblo Star Journal, but also her story first appeared in our feature called Gimme Shelter, A Survivor's Fight for Justice. We also had a podcast where we talked about that. And this is kind of the story where she really spoke publicly, I think, for the very first time about surviving abuse and confronting power and fighting for others that the system leaves behind. And so your courage, Chantal, really, I think, speaks so much of what we do here at PSJ, especially our commitment to centering survivors' voices and looking at justice and accountability. So I want to say first, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. And also thank you for your care in the way you've interviewed me for the this podcast and for the article.
So we've kind of front-loaded this a little bit with talking about the Epstein case, which is really kind of poignant right now, especially given the political climate that we're in and the real reality that people are questioning this. And you've lived through something that a lot of people can't imagine. Obviously, not necessarily directly related to Epstein, but really similar, right? And so I want to kind of, first of all, start with recognizing like what comes up for you when you're hearing all of this and the kind of, as Gregory always mentions, like the noise and swirl around this.
The accountability piece for the people that perpetrated this. I will share a little bit of my origin story as far as this concerns and what makes me as Virginia Giuffre puts in her book, a sister survivor. In 1984, November 27th, 1984, my stepdad, who was a high-profile administrator of Cary Medical Center in Caribou, Maine, was arrested on the job for unlawful sexual contact with a minor. He was tried and he was convicted in the state of Maine for unlawful sexual contact with a minor in 1985. During that time, as many of you know, the story of Gimme Shelter was the diary that I found when my mother took off on the run with me and my siblings. Prior to us taking off, and I will say this, in 2025, even I think in the 1990s, my mother would have been arrested along with Stuart, or my stepdad. And she wasn't. She was given a choice, pick the kids or him. And she said, I picked the kids, but she was meeting him in town and spreading untruths about how my sister made it up. We were making it up. We were mad, for whatever reason. And I had a very high-profile woman who was one of the other administrators, actually his boss's wife, pull me aside and interrogate me and warn me about not telling the truth. And because nobody wanted to believe that this type of person was living and breathing among the upper echelon of the community. And they didn't want to believe, a 15-year-old little girl. And who was, being an incorrigible teenager, which I wasn't. By the way, my sister was being blamed for a lot of stuff too, which just simply wasn't true, but it fit their narrative. So that kind of scrutiny on top, and just that little community was terrifying. Not only terrifying, it was, it made you question yourself. And think, finally I'm telling somebody, and I didn't go and turn him in like in a spiteful way. I was questioned. I mean, it came out through the questioning of a guidance counselor and the assistant principal of the school. So it wasn't something I sought out, but to be treated that way by the community was a whole nother thing. Again, it took me years to process. As a matter of fact, when I was listening to Nobody's Girl on audiobooks, I really, it resonated. There was parts of it that resonated so strongly with that experience.
I think when we talk about survivors, oftentimes we hear the story after the fact, right? They come out and they're saying that, and there's almost like this idea of like, wow, they're so brave, and and that's wonderful. But I think what happens sometimes in that is all of the turmoil that people had to go through in order just to be heard, right? And for people to even take them somewhat serious, right? And so I hear you talk about like, powerful men and powerful people and having to speak out in that way. And in your case, it coming out through people noticing, right? Teachers noticing, a guidance counselor noticing, but the ways in which there's such incredible turmoil that people have to, as survivors, have to go through.
Well, and you have to think it was 1984.
Yeah.
There were no Amber Alerts in 1984. I truly believe that these school professionals had gone to a conference to recognize the signs of children that are being abused. And we had just happened to miss the bus one day, and we were terrified because we missed the bus. We didn't know what the ramifications were going to be, and I think they picked up on that thread. And then just started going from there. But in 1984, backhanding your kid or leaving them in a car, or, you did what you wanted to with your kids. Nobody really questioned it unless they showed up with broken things. And oh my gosh, sexual child abuse was just not even talked about. Like, even if it was happening, it wasn't acknowledged. Like I said, I was questioned. Are you sure you're telling the truth? Did your sister put this in your head? And, all of those from a very, very pious, religious person in the community. And when that, again, the culture of the 1980s was so different than what we see now. And so it was it was just always shoved under the carpet. I mean, if you think about the culture towards women then and in the 90s, which is speaks to when this was happening in the 90s, even in the 2000s. I mean, we really didn't get to where women spoke out about assault at all until, like, I want to say, I don't want to use the word proudly, but without shame was the Me Too movement.
Absolutely.
And that was 2017, guys, you know? So, and then when you have the people that are supposed to be taking care of you, aka my mom, shaming me, being angry, belittling for that, like and it was espoused by the culture. You don't talk about it. You suppress that stuff, which also happens to, survivors of childhood sexual assault is different in that as an adult, you remember that. As a child, it shapes who you are and how you think about love and sex and marriage and relationships. And when that happens so young, in your 40s, and this was actually brought out in Virginia's book, Nobody's Girl, I'm going to reference that again because it was so well done, how women often don't come to terms with this until they're in their 40s or 50s. And one of the reasons why nothing was said, fear, shame, and then you take it next level for these Epstein people and the powerful people that can knock on your door, unalive you, all of those things. It's other than the healing aspect of saying it out loud. All of these sister survivors that have stood up in Virginia Giuffre are the bravest people on this planet right now. Absolutely. And to be told that they're lying or they're making it up is just it's like re-abusing them. That's exactly how it feels. And my 15-year-old self couldn't articulate that, but my 56-year-old self sure can.
Well, and I think what you bring up too is the multiple points of violence that survivors must face. They have the point of violence of the actual thing that happened to them, but they also have these points of violence that come from the institution. They have the points of violence that come from the family, that come from the community, that come from actually being able to say something, law enforcement, right? All of these points of violence, that this is not just one thing that people get victimized. It's right? I mean, they're consistently being violated from all different points. And many of those points are places that are supposed to be protecting.
Yes. And that was so poignant in the Virginia Giuffre story. Her dad basically sold her. And after listening to the audiobook, I went and I called my dad and I thanked him so much for giving me such a good place to land after the experience, because so many survivors don't have that. And many of the survivors that are speaking out now, they don't have that in their lives. And I'll speak to Virginia again. She, the space that she thought it was safe for her, when it turned out to be rocky, she couldn't handle it. And that is one of the other reasons this conversation is so important for all of those young people, or people that that were traumatized as children, that have never found a voice, have never been able to talk about it, and have never healed. That's why we need to have this conversation, and to to tell those people, why didn't they say something? Why didn't they say something all those years ago? Well, you put yourself in those shoes as best you can. And would you and could you? You don't know. You don't know that.
Yeah, I was going to say that on that point alone, now that we're actually hearing, because there's great power in numbers. And of course, you have Virginia, you've been referencing this woman who was just such a champion over so many decades. But now we're hearing all of these news stories. They're not really, well, they're new in the sense that we're hearing them for the first time. But the stories that these young women tell about just being interviewed and being, asked certain types of questions, to actually, as you were saying earlier, who's going to believe a 15-year-old? If you've got a police department, all male officers, and you've got these 13, 14, 15-year-old girls, well, I can see in the 1980s where that clearly, and even to this day, we're finding out that still is, the credibility. I mean, the victims are not being given anything whatsoever in that whole process. But that's something that just has amazed me is at what point do you have to just say to yourself, if it keeps coming back over and over and over again, and there are these files, as we've heard that they exist, what's missing? What's not there? I mean, that's where I was looking at our notes here, and I'm just trying to kind of look at what we're dealing with as a nation and then dealing with here in Pueblo, your story, how it resonates, and it kind of is harmonious with these, as you were saying, these sisters. What was the term that she used?
Survivor sisters.
Survivor sisters.
Yeah, I love that term that she used to describe her fellow sisters.
Yeah.
And the other thing is the blaming, the blaming of, why didn't you leave? You stayed, you were being paid, you went on these things, you didn't say anything. The psychological warfare that is unleashed on children that go through this is something that, unless you've been through it, you really can't understand. But I remember when I was told that my stepdad had been arrested and he was in jail and didn't even have a pillow, I felt sorry for him. I think about that person now, but in reality, and trigger warning, if you need to walk away, this might be a good time to fast forward. I was 7 to 8 years old when he first assaulted me. And our relationship, now that I can have looked back and analyzed it and wrote about it and all of the things, was not a stepfather-daughter relationship. It was a man-woman relationship. And when your psychological blueprint is being formed during something that traumatizing, it's going to affect how you relate to that person. And it was very conflicting and confusing that I felt sorry for him. Now, I'll tell you, once I got to a healthy place and I was, in Oklahoma and had really pushed that behind me, that didn't even, to be honest, rear its head again in my memories for 5 years. Like it was in my early 20s when I had my first flashback to those days. And, I was set up a little differently in that I would go visit my dad in the summer. So once I hit Oklahoma, it was like my brain was like, oh, I'm here for the summer, but I know I'd never have to leave. So I just pushed it down. And, and it's much easier and safer to do that because once you excavate it, it is in your face and it is glaring at you, and you have to answer those hard questions. Why did I do that? Why did I behave that way? Why did what made me, go along with certain things that now you think, again, when you're in that space and being traumatized as a child, those are the responses you're going to have. So I say to those people that are judging these women on why did you take so long and why are you just talking about this now, that reserve your judgment. reserve your judgment.
I was just going to remind our listeners, if you didn't listen to the first podcast and you listened to Chantal tell these stories, clearly you have your knowledge now of just this type of situation in, sadly, the universe that we live in, you have taken it upon yourself as a professional career, because the language, the laws, the understanding. I just want to remind our viewers, if they didn't know, tell them just a little about what you do now professionally, because we need that context, because you took it upon yourself to become a champion.
And I think it is an important, because I do want to transition into how these things work, but I would also second that. I would love what Gregory said, right? For you to kind of talk about what you do as a profession.
I am a disability rights advocate and trainer in civil rights compliance law, specializing in the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the goal of Advantage Advocacy is to have people live as independently as possible with disabilities or with, having been institutionalized. So however that looks. It might really surprise some people that I actually do take sex offenders on my caseload. After they have re-entered society, they need to work. And for me, for a long time, I declined to work with sex offenders because I didn't ethically think it would be appropriate for me to do that. And then I got this one advocacy case that made me change my mind. And then I said, yes, I will work with offenders. I can do this, because they came to me without me knowing the backstory and of this particular person. And then when I found it out, I was like, not everybody was like this, but this is also really where the rubber meets the road. If you want to fix the system, this is an avenue to do that. So that's what I do and I'm an advocate. Really, honestly, now the best thing to explain what I do is Google me. All the stuff comes up. But it is my life's work, and I am very dedicated to being that voice for people who haven't found theirs, can't use it, or don't want to.
Well, and I think, kind of, as you said, you can definitely read the story, and we've gone over the story, but I think, the parallels between some of your experiences and then the institutional violence that you saw related to people with disabilities and the ways in which they were being violated, their bodies were being violated, their personhood was being violated. At the same time, your personhood and your humanness was being violated. And then again, similarly, the ways in which the violence coming from the institution, these things almost melded together for you. We talked about in the original one, you being forged in kind of this fire.
I like that word.
of having to, your own experience of being violated and how that forged you into this path of stopping the violation of other humans and the violation that occurs that we see all the time. And so can you kind of speak to that a little bit, or how you see yourself, or how your experiences have influenced how you champion for others, but also ensure that they too are at the table and that their voices are being heard through it all?
I was so blessed when I was found in Michigan and taken to Oklahoma to have been able to call Nancy Woodyard mom. She was my stepmom, but she was such a positive force in showing me something different. And it was her influence, and under her being raised by her. Of course, my dad was there. He would not have known what to do with me. And I'm sure Mom didn't either, but she did. And she did that. So that motivated me. And ironically, she got me involved in extracurricular activities, the speech and debate team. And she was also the one that said, hey, Chantal, here's a typewriter that you should type out this diary. And all of her wisdom that summer, having me do that, it got it out of me. And it also helped me process, obviously, what had just happened to me. and was a healing time. If I hadn't had that, if I hadn't landed there, I don't know that I would be here. She taught me to be strong. She taught me to use my voice. She believed me. They believed me. And that right there went so far. And honestly, I didn't set out to be an advocate. I was going to be the next Julia Roberts. I was in a rock band. But I was working for an agency that had been developed to help people live in the community. And that's how I was paying my bills rather than waiting tables. I thought if I'm going to wait on people, I'm going to wait on people who really need me to wait on them. So, and that's how I actually got into the career. And so it wasn't something I decided to do, but as I was working in the trenches after the ADA was passed, and I was doing different things with my clients, which comes out in the pilot and more on the show. I looking back on that now, realized it was, I think, a culmination of where I had been that helped me be able to help them speak up. And in a place much like, again, in the 80s was where, we didn't have the Amber Alerts and stuff. Some of the stuff that we did in the group homes and, in the name of, again, figuring out community living were not the best practices now. And I think back and go, oh my gosh, did we really do that? Ends up getting some of that's pointed out in the show. But how it's evolved over, and how the advocacy has evolved. And I'll tell you, if you'd have told me I'd be sitting here doing a podcast talking about this huge predator. And I mean, he wasn't just a predator of these ladies. He was a predator of these rich billionaire people too. This guy was just a total predator. And the parallels, ironically, the event that made me go snooping around in my basement for something else that made me find that diary was within a week of his arrest in 2019. I can't think that's a coincidence with all the other stuff. So I'm supposed to do this. I'm supposed to talk about this to help people heal. And that helps me make sense of what happened to me.
Well, and I think that you said something earlier about the Me Too movement and about how, we're finally seeing people speak up, and it's alarming. But I think for women, it's often not so alarming that so many speak up. I think oftentimes, even as children, we're very much taught this kind of culture of, always have a buddy with you and because the idea that, there's like this big kind of predator like Jeffrey Epstein. Well, those predators exist all around us, and they exert this kind of power, especially over women. And I love how you talked about how your stepmom, who is your mom, right?
Nancy, yeah.
How she led the charge in showing you that you had a voice. And we're seeing that with women like yourself and the women in Me Too and the women who are these sister survivors that you're talking about, how the women are really leading the charge in uncovering this and saying, this is a very real thing that we experience. It's a very real thing that women are experiencing all the time. It's, watch yourself as you go out after dark and, all of this stuff. And so also, I love that you talk about that.
The subtleness of the culture, like growing up in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, sometimes you were like, did that guy really grab me? Did that really happen? Like the insidiousness of the actions that were perfectly acceptable. Nobody called these guys out on this stuff, not even, me at times. Like, but when I got to Oklahoma, I'll never forget. I was, we were all, having some illegal adult beverages on a dirt road, what you do in the country, and one of the star football players came up and full on grabbed me, grabbed both hands, grabbed me, and I think he might have expected me to slap him. Well, I'd had just enough punch to literally punch him in the face. And I had a ring on, so it left a mark on his chin. And the next Monday, we were all waiting to get in school, and one of the other guys was teasing him about that. That guy hated me the rest of the year, like treated me like I was just he was so disgusted he would just look down at me and not talk to me. And if I had not had my last name, I don't know what he would have done to me. You know what I mean? Because I was Wayne and Nancy's daughter, I got away with that. But had I not been, I don't think I would have.
Wait till this podcast drops, and we're going to get a comment say with a picture saying that's the scar. That's that's the scar.
Unfortunately, that guy, we tried to find him when his brother passed away, and nobody's been able to find him. I don't know if he's around or not. But if we do, I'd like to have a little conversation with him about why he felt like it was okay to do that. You know, nobody had that conversation. You know why he felt like it was okay to do that? Because that's what guys did, and nobody taught them or told them any differently. It was the culture of the time. So that we've had a couple of things that have happened during that, during the trajectory of my story and coming out and being here in 2025. One, I think Epstein was not supposed to be caught, and boy, did they try to cover him up in 2007. Whoever he was connected to, we're not going to go into the naming of the names or all of that stuff or the politics, because I'm going to say this, I'm going to firmly stand on this. This isn't about politics. This is about justice for ladies that were assaulted, children that were assaulted and sold and passed around like, candy. Right, like candy, like candy. Yeah, in a jar. Like candy. And they were children. They're human beings. And now they are talking about what happened to them. And I just, again, this is hard, but I think not continuing to bust through these doors and to talk about this hard stuff is just going to keep it in the shadows.
Well, we're going to break for just a moment for our sponsor. We're going to be going into our next section, which is on systems, power, and accountability. But here's just a moment from one of our sponsors.
Homeownership is possible with a trusted partner.
It brings us a lot of joy to be able to say that this house is our own and that we've poured our hearts into making it our own.
Alyssa and Ryan are among the more than 155,000 people Chaffa has helped become homeowners since 1974. It starts with homebuyer education and connecting you with a statewide network of participating lenders. Get started at chfainfo.com/yourhome. Chaffa is an equal housing lender.
So we're back. This is the Voices of Pueblo podcast. We're here with Molly Cotner and Chantal Woodyard. For those of you that remember that name, Chantal Woodyard, you might have seen it in each issue of the Pueblo Star Journal because she's on our board of directors. But also earlier in the year, Molly Cotner did a special feature titled Gimme Shelter, which has taken on a life of its own, which we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the episode. But right now, we're just going to look at this next section, which we'd like to really kind of dig a little bit into systems, power, and accountability. When the Department of Justice said earlier this year that there's no client list, that the files contain no new names, some people saw this as the end of the story. But you've said before that transparency isn't about gossip or famous names. It's about accountability. Can you say more about that? What does accountability look like to you, Chantal?
Accountability looks like each and every one of these people going to jail and serving a sentence for violating these young girls. You know, again, as far as a trajectory of laws and stuff, you know, in 1984, when my stepdad was arrested, there wasn't a lot of sentencing. There wasn't a lot, so I think he spent 2 months in a county jail for unlawful sexual contact with a minor in 1984. I've worked with an offender who was out and was arrested in the 90s and just recently got out. And it pretty much the same kind of scenario. I think in the 90s, They were making some examples out of people, like the pendulum swung the other way, so to speak. But now there are much more realistic sentences that were not around in the 80s and 90s. They have evolved because of teachers and of care professionals recognizing unsafe conditions and children that have been neglected and abused.
And we talked earlier a little bit about culture and the culture of how this stuff happens and then accordingly then how it gets punished. But, I would like to talk too about like prevention and how we stop this from happening in the first place. Because I think oftentimes people think, well, great, they served a prison sentence. Now everything should be just fine and dandy, right? And that's not true, because survivors like yourself, that doesn't end when the prison sentence ends, right? I mean, this is something that you carry with you for life. So I think there also has to be like bigger conversations about how we prevent this stuff from happening in the first place. Because again, we have like these big cases like Epstein that's happening. But what doesn't often get talked about is the little girls who, are experiencing this within the family, which we know that happens
a
quite
lot.
often.
It does. Yeah. And it doesn't, it's not is in the deep dark shadows as it used to be because of our culture. Our culture is calling it out. Women are standing up for themselves. Teachers, again, professionals are recognizing the signs of abuse and neglect more and better than prior to where we're living right now. But also, I think it's, the generations behind us that we are teaching to raise better versions of ourselves, better versions of young men, better versions of young women, and women, for women, stand up for ourselves, recognize at an early age. I have a almost 12-year-old granddaughter who I've had to have the talk about, no adults keep secrets. You don't keep adult secrets, those kind of preventative things. And it's kind of a sad reflection, I think, on society as a whole, but we have to do that. But also teaching boys how to be respectful. It's not okay to grab a girl. It's not okay to, do those things. Oh, being mean to a girl on the playground means you like them, but there's other ways to show people you like them.
I was just going to ask you, because I think that's the first time I've ever heard that. I mean, how do you have a conversation with a 12-year-old girl? What's that conversation like? I mean, what are these are things where on one hand, as a parent, you're thinking, oh my God, I'm a bad parent, because I'm going in this area where I've got to draw some boundaries. But then again, you don't know what this child has actually experienced, firsthand, but you are recognizing there's triggers, like you were saying earlier with teachers now, certain little triggers and signals they pick up on, which then lead to other conversations. I'm just wondering, that's got to be the most difficult thing to do, is have that conversation with a 12-year-old.
Ironically, I've just had this conversation with my daughters. I wish that they had this more healed version of me. But even then, and I'm going to refer to my youngest, she was in a junior high and had a sixth grade, and there was a boy that's in eighth grade. He was really a good-looking boy, all the charisma, all the stuff. And he was really interested in Clara and wanted to go to the movies. And she really wanted to go. And that's when I took the opportunity to say, here's the thing about boys. Not all boys, but I'm going to say this one might be that way. I said, not all boys, but I said, so what are you going to do if he tries to grab your chest? And she looked at me like big eyes. Like, again, but I was just asking her organically, what would you do if he tried to do that? Are you ready for somebody to do that? And she was like, no. And I said, then think about putting yourself when you're in a position by yourself with him or in a dark theater. And she made the choice not to go. So it wasn't put on me like, no, you can't go. But we had that conversation. And mind you, I was a single mom at that time. I think I was going through what'll probably end up as part of season 3 or 4 in the series at the time. But reflecting on that and how different the conversation I would have or had with my granddaughter, it was, again, I there's things I pick apart about my parenting, Again, like I said, I wish they'd have had a more healed version of me. But I feel really strongly that I needed to give her the tools to make informed decisions and to protect herself. And both of my girls have said, I've not forgotten that you said, don't put myself, I'm in a position alone with them if I'm not prepared to do this or for them to do this. Mm-hmm. And it kind of goes back to that bear in the woods, or would you walk with the man or the bear analogy, right, that was passed around a few years ago. It's really kind of the same concept. But as the mother and grandmother of girls, that is what I have done to protect them and to have them protect themselves. But also, I think it culturally and systemically comes down to how the kind of examples we are showing our children and what kind of people to be.
As we and I think it's important that, RAIN.org has a great resources about preventative measures and about boundaries and those kind of things. So really kind of lean into some of those resources, I think, is really important because we're running out of time to get into a lot of those things.
And to speak to that too, which is probably what compelled me in the 1990s to educate disabled people about how just say no and how to protect themselves. And I think part of that, again, where I couldn't recognize that when I was 21, 22, that's what was happening. I was making sure that they knew how to speak up. And now in my course, in all of my coursework, where I do personal adjustment training, whether I'm doing communication with the students, we talk about setting boundaries, and it's okay to take up that space and say, no, this isn't okay, and how to do that in requesting accommodations and modifications, but also far more for their personal safety and mental health, well-being.
And I think that's such an important conversation as we talk about bodies, right? And the ways in which power exudes itself over bodies and how you've taken that and you've been able to use that for being an advocate. I think I want to ask a little bit of a personal question, and please feel free to tell me to shut my mouth. But, as you talk about a new version of yourself and how you've been able to, again, I think, exist in the world with the kind of trauma and pain that you've had by this kind of culture that has allowed this to go on for, far too long. I want to ask, what does obviously you can't speak for all, but what does your healing journey look like? Is it an ongoing journey? Do you feel like it's complete? What kind of motivates you to do these? I know that's a lot of unpacked and layered questions, but I just want to ask that.
This answer would have been different at various times throughout my life. In my early 20s, when I left Oklahoma and went to Denver, just part of the fun story, I went to see Motley Crue and didn't leave. Daddy and Nancy were getting divorced. It was messy, and I was like, well. Anyway, I ended up, and that's how I landed in Denver, which I knew was home. I was, at the time, and where I was supposed to land. But if you'd asked me then, I would have told you, heck yeah, I survived all that, and I'm healed, and I'm here, and I'm doing my thing. And after I had been in the wonderful space of being in Oklahoma for those years and being in that, so I would have told you. And I, actually I had done a little counseling, but not really. So I would have told you, yeah, I'm healed, until I opened that newspaper and saw Mark Hopkinson's picture in 1992. And I, all the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I had this memory of something that I had shoved down for, at that point, probably 10 years, and so I would have told you up until that point, yes, I'm healed. And that manifested itself with the flashbacks coming back that I was, I drink more. I worked, and I was always, I wasn't an alcoholic, but I self-medicated during those days. And I was, where's the party? Let's go. And so I wasn't healed, but I would have told you I was. And, I was using my voice. That's when I was also, setting up the sex ed classes for my clients that I worked, my residential clients that I worked with and stuff. So, and then, flash forward to when I had kids, and that initially having my oldest at first, and then remembering and dealing with the family dynamics that were going on at the same time. They were also very triggering. We won't get into all of that, but simultaneously triggering me while I'm trying to parent and be protective. And I remember some of my younger siblings who are still in school, giving me a hard time about how protective I was of who stayed with my daughter, because when my bio mom was with the current stepdad, who was really great, that was fine. But when they split up, I wasn't letting her spend the night. I wasn't spending the night, and they gave me a hard time for that. But I felt like standing up for that boundary was healing, right? So, but I think I really did a lot of the healing when I did the deep dive and started, found that diary and got into Gimme Shelter, and that really unearthed so many more things than I ever thought it would. And so now I can look at and look back at those healing, trying to heal, but also having those triggers and those things that knock you back and that set you back, which is what happens. Sorry to say this, but what is happening to these women every time they're up testifying, telling the story, oh, you're lying. It's happening to them again and again and again. And it took me a long time to recognize that that thing triggers me. And so part of that healing process is taking away that trigger's power. Not everybody can do that, but man, if you can.
I was just going to say on that note, we talk about veterans and this notion of PTSD, that experience that they had during war that was so traumatic and it's very different for each and every individual. And what triggers it could be a sound, it could be a smell, it could be exactly. So and I'm sure there's a lot of research, because you can start to see if you're a woman and you're going through this traumatic experience, and whether you're there, on your own will or not, but there's overlap there. I would be really curious in terms of studies where people have looked at this notion of traumatic, when you look at PTSD, which is the term that we use. And I know now we didn't even talk about that term up until just, recent history. But, I just remember Vietnam veterans coming back from Vietnam and not only having that traumatic experience in Vietnam, but then coming home and experiencing the same traumatic experience because the Americans. So that's where my mind is going, because I'm thinking, even though we talk about the Epstein files, it seems so far away. Yeah. But all of a sudden, this is something that happens, sadly, probably each and every block in the world for that. I don't have any data, but the stories, sadly, they're underreported. We don't know just a tiny, tiny bit of what's actually happened. So I'm wondering, I look at veterans, I look at all these survivors, and I'm thinking, damn, we've got a long way to go with wellness and mental health.
Well, and I think what's really important about what you say is that it's these big cases that really force you to look in your own backyard, right? And really,
especially with the hard topics.
Exactly.
This is
really
such a taboo,
talking about this
topic.
Yep. And just even talking about it. I've had the good fortune of being friends with you on social media, and I've seen you post about things like, we really need to be uncovering, we need to be listening to survivors. And what's really interesting is I always go to the comments in your...
I have some colorful folks on there.
But it's really... It is really telling how, again, kind of the overarching theme of, they don't know what they're talking about, or why didn't they say something? I've seen even in some of the comments that you have, and you handle them beautifully. I will say, I do not know that I would handle them with the kind of grace that you handle them with.
Thank you, Pearl and Nancy.
But I mean, I even see in there, these comments of like, ugh, why did they come forward sooner? What does this have to do with anything? This is a political matter. And I think you've spoken to all these points that, no, well, I mean, it's political as far as the body is political, right? But I mean, as far as like, no, this is not just a political attack on a person, right?
Or a party.
Or a party, right? And you've said, no, listen, no, their voices need to be heard and those kind of things. But you see it trickle down into our own communities. Mm-hmm. And when you see that even our own communities have that kind of response, it makes you wonder about survivors in our own community and their ability, right? Their ability to come forward because...
Well, and their experiences when they did come forward and what happened to them that maybe made it go back into the shadows, So if they're seeing experiences of survivors telling their stories and there be outcomes, my stepdad, again, spent 2 months in jail. He was supposed to be a registered sex offender forever. And, he didn't even do that. He actually ended up working with children in the Seventh-day Adventist Church up until the poly-class law was passed. So then he was allowed to retire. So there was not justice and accountability there at all as far as that goes. Which again today would be very different. And my bio mom had no consequences, other than maybe the fallout of our relationship, which really I don't believe was a big consequence for her. She had other kids to be the good children, I guess. So, but again, the times and the culture of that allowed for that to happen. It wouldn't happen today.
And I want to talk about the accountability for her because that's going to be important for something we're going to kind of end with. But I did want to end on, before we get into kind of another segment, as far as what's coming up for you and events ahead. What would you, as your older version of yourself, tell to young people now who might be experiencing this or have experienced? Or, I mean, it doesn't even have to be young people, just women in general or individuals in general who have experienced this kind of violence. What would you say to them? What would be the message that you would give them?
Find the thing that's going to heal you. Talk about it. Examine it. And then let it go. And find the thing that's going to help you go forward as who you are. That's many times in this process, I was like, I think about what person I would be, had my dad not intervened and I had just stayed on the run and stayed with, what my life would have been like. And I think about those and going back and times that I wish I would have known how to be more assertive or knew that I could be more assertive. Find the place where you're a safe space where you're believed and where you're nurtured and come to terms with it and don't let them have the power over you anymore,
And I think this is a really great call to action for our communities as well. Belief and support
yes.
and take care of survivors. We need community to do that. We need people to say, we're going to stand with you and next to you, and we're going to hold your hand, and we're going to be that safe place to land. And so this is an important thing, especially for us as the Pueblo Star Journal, in the ways in which we believe in bridging community in. And I think that this is a call to action for our community.
Yes.
So I'm going to kind of flip the script a little bit here and talk about that accountability piece, especially for your bio mom, and that the accountability has not been lost yet. Your biological mother has passed, but that piece has not changed yet. You have Gimme Shelter, the pilot that is based on your life story with some creative freedoms, obviously.
Yes,
but
it's historical fiction.
Yes, right. Based on your experiences, based on the advocacy work that you're doing, it has been turned into a TV, or getting turned into a TV
it's a
pilot.
television series. We've got the whole first season mapped out. We did a 10-series fest. We were one of the finalists. And again, Google me. This does come up if you want more information about the Series Fest. We were one of the finalists in the Down Syndrome Inclusive and Diversity Award, which was, again, to me, that was very, that meant a lot to me. So how many times did I say sorry. And so that put us in front of networks, and we've gotten some attention, and we really hope to be in production by this time next year. Keep your fingers crossed.
Tell a little bit about Series Fest, just the numbers.
Yeah.
Yes, so Series Fest is like the Shark Tank meets America has talent of television series. And I did not realize the heavy competition for this. I kind of, being in the advocacy world and not in the Hollywood world, I didn't know much about this, but it was an incredible experience, and I learned a lot, and we got the story out there, and we got a lot of, again, the best way is Google Chantal Woodyard, and all of the stuff comes up on the Series Fest, the podcast, my business. But the Series Fest is the top stuff, because that's what's happening now. I am now IMBD official. Great. So that comes up too, which I'm pretty proud of. I mean, that's something I can if nothing happens, I can be proud that I have pushed it this far. With my great team, Chris Fonseca, Peter Tren. That's gotten it up the chain this far, but it's also, one of the other things that's gotten it up the chain this far is the content, is the story.
So right now we're going to close with a little bit about truth, healing, and what comes next. You talked just a little bit about the Series Fest, and it's fantastic to learn where you kind of placed and how that really evolved. But I'll include the links in the podcast description, so that way this will all be included. I will also list, for convenience sake, the first podcast that we did. So I have a feeling if someone's getting this first, they're going to go, wait a second, what did she say in the first podcast? So we'll put that all together. But before we close, I want to ask, what does healing look like to you now after everything? And I say everything. What's happened? A lot has happened in a very short period of time. What would you say?
Healing to me is moving forward with my advocacy work and continuing to share stories and to hear stories and to give people a roadmap to helping to heal themselves. There's a lot of power in that, and so I really want to do that. I also, as an advocate, am continuing to beat the drum to keep our special education programs and to keep our programs for people with disabilities. They have been severely cut. The staff has been severely cut, and the funding to do what I do on a one-on-one level. Now, here's the crazy thing. It has been approved. It's sitting in D.C., and it's not because of the government shutdown that it's not been allotted. One of the reasons it's not been allotted is because what used to be the job of 2 to 3 people per state within the Department of Education has now been reduced to, I think, 2 people for the whole nation. So once the government opens, having those funds allotted is going to be a process that there's not enough employees there to do. So that is what it looks like for me. Healing is continuing to fight the fight. I didn't think we would be back here as far as that goes, having to go back to some of the basics. But if that's what we have to do, I'm here for it.
I think it's so wonderful that you you turn all of this and you say, well, my healing is still fighting. It's like, I'm going to, I have this thing, this pilot in the works. I often, wonder how you're going to navigate that when the pilot hits and you're having, kind of, you said this Hollywood experience, but also doing your advocacy work and balancing that. But it seems like the fight still exists for you, and that you're going to keep that healing journey of the fight going.
Well, I'm teaching people how to fight for themselves, and that's where the rubber meets the road. And I will probably do that until I am no longer here.
And I think this is probably one of the most auspicious times in history where fighting and protesting is literally the only way forward right now. So I think there are a lot of things that are happening right now that are lending themselves to kind of self-empowerment in a really unique way. And hopefully some of these very, very difficult subject matters will be slowly but surely coming to the surface. Again, humanity is humanity, and we just have to deal with it, one step at a time. But one last thing, and what message do you want to leave with other survivors who might be listening to this podcast now?
Speak your truth. Find somebody that will believe you and speak your truth.
I think that thank you for being vulnerable. I think that this is never an easy conversation to have, but I think it's necessary, Gregory, to your point. I think we even as editors of the paper have said it's time, right? We have to start taking, I think, our kind of call out was that, we're facing a truth of democracy and as people, and now more than ever is a time to exactly what you said, fight and really, collectively recognize each other's humanness and recognize the ways in which humanness has been taken from people and how we have to stand up for people and how all of these roots lead to the same thing, right? That the same kind of oppressive tactics that harm and hurt people. And so thank you for being one of the ones to speak up. And
I hope if I just reach one person that can feel better, that's the point.
And I just have to, on just a note of lessons learned, I think if we just look at recent activities, just at a national level, when you talk about organized protests and demonstrations, regardless of which side you're on, but when you look at what's happening now, I think the thing that's amazing is the last great fight was really the civil rights in the 1960s and the 70s. And here we are, the champions are all in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And there are so many lessons there to be learned, because if an 80-year-old can get out there and march for democracy, I hope our younger people are paying attention, because they're going to be the ones that are going to have to take their charge when we deal with another situation like this, where we feel threatened. And I think as a nation, fighting and protesting, that's just built into who we are. And that's why we're here today.
And I want to tie into, you take the subject of childhood sexual abuse. I think, and I have, like you said, you've read in my comments, all of those people would agree that anybody that does that to a child should go to jail. If you took out the power and the politics out of that name, they wouldn't be having that discussion. I think this is an idea that everybody can get behind, whatever religion you are, whatever political party you are, that powerful or people that abuse children should have consequences, period.
And stop. Yes. Sacred territory.
Mic drop.
So, Molly, do you want to?
Yeah.
Do you want to close us out here, Molly? Thank you so much,
Absolutely.
Chantal. And Molly, why don't you wrap it up for us?
So that is a wrap for this episode of the Voices of Pueblo podcast from the Pueblo Star Journal. Thanks for listening and celebrating the stories of Pueblo. For more stories and updates, visit pueblostarjournal.org. And don't forget, you can find our podcast on all major platforms, including iTunes, YouTube Music, and Spotify. Subscribe, follow, and keep listening. And remember, if you or someone you know has experienced sexual assault, help is available. You can contact the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673 or visit RAINN, RAINN.org for confidential support.
Receiving down payment assistance from CHAFA allowed us to expand our options for what kind of houses we were looking at.
CHAFA is Colorado's trusted partner for homeownership. Visit chfainfo.com/yourhome. CHAFA is an equal housing lender.